This entitled mother calls the cops on a daycare worker who's just trying to do her job. What crazy excuse does the mother give for calling the cops? Happy birthday if today's your birthday, and on with the revamped show. I walked into a gas station, let's call it Square L, about 7:30 AM. Locally, that's 30 minutes after they start selling alcohol. County is dry between 3 AM and 7 AM. I grab 2 of the largest packs of cheap beer they sell and head up to the register. No big deal, just stocking up for a small study party with friends on campus later that day. The person behind the register eyes me suspiciously as I set them on the counter and tells me I'm not buying them. I politely explain it's after 7 AM and I don't see a problem. The manager, denoted by dress shirt instead of polo, leans over and tells her to get my ID, so she asks me for it. I'm like, fine, whatever, and I fidget around a minute before realizing it's in my car. I say as much and offer to grab it, and she told me to go ahead. I dash out to my car, grab my wallet from my book bag, no big deal, walk back in and present it to the person at the register, who promptly glances at it, snickers, snaps it in half, tosses it in the trash, and tells me to get the heck out of her store. I stood there for a minute, sort of dumbfounded. The manager tells me to get the heck out of the store or police will be called and someone is getting arrested. I mumbled something along the lines of, oh crap, and opted to comply with the second half. I went to my car, grabbed my phone, called non-emergency, and told them I just had my driver's license taken and destroyed, read off the address, ended my call, then headed back inside the store. The manager tells me that's it, they're calling the cops. I let her know I already did. The clerk laughs and shouts for the people in the store to hear. Y'all want to stick around for this? This punk just called the cops on us for taking their fake ID. It took about 10 minutes, but they showed up. As they arrived, the manager rushed out the door and I walked behind. The cop asked for me immediately by name, dismissing the manager, pointing at me and rattling off about my fake ID. I told him what happened and I was told to leave or cops would be called and someone were to be arrested. He then takes the statement from the manager, then the clerk, then requests the ID be retrieved from the trash. He looks it over and hands the 2 pieces back to me. He hasn't said anything other than simple requests for info up to this point, then asks me to come along and we're going to have a chat outside. At this point, I'm actually growing a bit concerned. He punches in the DL number and up pops my face and info. Clean history, both driving and criminal. He then lets me know that destruction of a license is a misdemeanor in this state and asks which one snapped it. We have a brief conversation, and at this point, he's smiling ear to ear. He asks me if I want to press charges, and at this point, I've already missed first class, so I state I do. I'm told to play along with him, and we share course of action. By this time, there are 4 squad cars and police milling about. The customers had grown scared. We walked back in. I'm staring at the floor, looking pensive, and he says loudly, "What do we say?" and nudges me. I politely say, "I'm very sorry this happened and I'm sure it won't happen again." The clerk and manager begin chuckling. I then finish with, "The manager requested the clerk take it, who then snapped it. Then the manager is the one who said someone is getting arrested." The officer undid the cuffs from his belt, walked up to the clerk and began with Miranda rights. Another did the same to the manager. Another 30 minutes roll by while they are sitting in the back of squad cars. The store is devoid of employees until someone walks out from the back cooler. I wait patiently. Eventually they are cut loose under own recognizance, and I am given a date to play witness in court. We head back in, and the manager is irate. The employee, on release, bolted. I pay for my now warm beer and leave. My professor got a great laugh out of the police report and let me do my project presentation late anyway. I'm sure if you were the clerk and someone who looked like a student was ordering alcohol, especially a weird time really early in the morning, yeah, you would be a little suspicious. But to actually destroy their ID, like, why would you take that chance? What if, theoretically, what if you're wrong? They probably didn't think that it was like a crime, and maybe they felt really strongly like 100% this is a fake ID. I guess I'm just a cautious person by nature, so even if I think I'm right, I'll take precautions so that, I don't know, I don't get arrested for destroying someone's ID. I recently moved to a new house in a small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone. I moved to this town from a bigger city, so it was a bit of an adjustment, but I liked liked the quiet, and it was closer to my new job, which was a plus. My new job was at a daycare center, important later, that opened at 6 in the morning. I requested the opening shift so that I would get off at 2 p.m. and be able to have some free time in the afternoons. Now, when I moved into the neighborhood, a few of the neighbors stopped by to welcome me and give me plates of cookies, casseroles, etc. One woman, our future entitled mother, and her family came by to say hello and asked me where I worked. I told them that I was a daycare worker.
Oh, really? I've been looking for somewhere for my boy to stay when I'm at work over the summer. What ages do you watch?
5 to 6-year-olds.
That's perfect.
She says this with a smile. Yeah, I'd be happy to see him in my class if you ever decided to enroll him. This was the seed that would sprout into a giant tree of crazy. Now on with the show. So it was a typical morning for me, up at the butt crack of dawn, and out the door at 5:45 to get to work by 6. It was a pretty uneventful day. Nothing major happened. So by the time 2 p.m. rolled around, the day had flown by. Come to find out that this was not the case for everyone today. I arrived home to find a police car and the entitled mum with her 5-year-old son talking to the police on my porch. I was confused as there was no reason for her to be there and no one had tried to contact me about anything happening at my house. I park and get out of my car and start to walk to the house and I call out, "What's going on?" The entitled mum was not talking to the police. She was screaming and upon seeing me, she completely exploded.
How dare you leave my son outside all day? He could have been kidnapped.
She continued on like this as 2 police officers approached me. Police Officer 1 and Police Officer 2. "Excuse me, miss, but did you leave this little boy outside while you were gone?" "No, I left for work early this morning. I'm just getting home now. I've been at work all day." At this point, I look over at entitled mother and her son. The son was filthy. It looked like he'd been playing in the dirt. His knee was scratched but not bloody, and he was holding an open backpack that contained a coloring book and crayons, based on what was laying all over my porch. The officers looked stunned a bit and looked at each other. They asked me to follow them, and we make our way up onto the porch.
"Aren't you going to arrest her? She endangered my son. What kind of a babysitter are you?"
"Babysitter?"
"Yes, you're my babysitter. You told me you were when I stopped by before. Well, some babysitter you are. Look at what you did to my son. You said you'd be happy to watch him."
I finally start to understand what's going on. "Oh, no, you misunderstood me. I work at a daycare center a few minutes away. I don't run a daycare out of my house. I said I would be happy to have him in my class at the daycare."
"Don't lie. You're just trying to cover your butt."
"Can you prove that you were at this daycare today?" I say that I can and pull out my phone and call the center. The police officer starts talking to my boss for a few minutes before handing me back the phone. "Ma'am, was this woman here when you dropped your son off?"
"Yes, she was. I saw her through the window."
"Ma'am, her boss just confirmed that she was at work." The entitled mom cut her off.
"She's lying. I bet she called a friend to cover her butt. I bet you don't even have a job. That's why she has to run a crappy babysitting service out of a crappy house."
I just got home from work. There weren't even any cars in the driveway.
"Yes, there was. You probably left through the back door. You were supposed to watch him. You said you would watch him. And you never opened the door for him to come inside. He's hungry and thirsty, and look at him. He's covered in dirt. You should have let him in and watched him."
"Weren't you listening? I'm not a babysitter. I work at a daycare. I said I would be happy to watch him if you enrolled him there."
"She's lying."
"Ma'am, did this woman speak to you this morning about watching your son?" "No, like I said, I was at work by 6. "Have the two of you ever set up a time for you to watch her son?" "No, this is only my second conversation with her. The first was me explaining where I work. I guess she got confused."
"You lying little. I'm going to tell everyone how crappy you are at babysitting, and you'll never get any work again. Good luck at keeping your house when you're unemployed."
"For the last time, lady, I am not a babysitter." "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to arrest you for child endangerment." The entitled mum then turns from angry to furious and begins yelling at me again for misleading her, completely dropping the whole "she's lying" story, and says she's going to sue me. It's about 2 weeks now. The mum was let go for whatever reason, and the little boy goes to the daycare I work at now. I just wish I had a picture of the EM's face when she realized I was her son's teacher and that I wasn't lying after all, but that's a story for another time. How incompetent of a parent do you have to be to drop your kid off at a stranger's house after only having having one conversation with them when your kid's aged like 5 or 6 years old, and then just be like, "Have a good day, sweetie." It seems that for some parents, it's only when there are consequences for their bad actions that they try to act like they care about their kid. It seems like to her, having the child is more of an inconvenience, and the fact that she made a mistake means she's trying to push the blame of that inconvenience and project it onto the hero of our story. But an entitled parent pushing blame onto someone else instead of owning up to it does not surprise me in the least. Second semester of my freshman year, I was taking a music theory course. The professor was very serious about her job, and this class was a bit of a weed out class for students who wanted to pursue music education. I was taking it for fun. By the time the end of the semester rolled around, I got the feeling she didn't really like me much because I didn't pay attention in class, but still got A's on the homework exams and playing tests. I'd played piano for a decade by this point, so she couldn't really punish me for anything since I wasn't disrupting the class, but was just a thorn in her side through lack of participation. Thank goodness that wasn't part of the grade. Our final project was to find a poem we liked and craft a song using the poem as the lyrics. As she passes out the requirement sheet, she announced that she would be playing these for the class, so we need to put in effort so we don't feel embarrassed by what she plays in front of everyone, about 30 people. She shoots a glance at me, the least involved student, as she says that, which I took as a challenge. I found a poem called A Minor Bird and decided to craft my masterpiece in the key of E flat minor. The reasoning? 6 of the 7 notes are lowered a half step, so it's not a matter of thinking everything I see is lowered, but everything but one note is lowered, which is fairly hard to keep track of while sight reading, something that utilizes both hands on the piano. We were to hand them in at the beginning of class, and she would go through the stack and play them without practicing first. It's a freshman level class. How hard could it be? I spent weeks working on this because I wanted to make sure it was both well written and an absolute pain to play. I had upperclassmen take a look at it to make sure everything was labeled correctly, and they told me I was the most magnificent jerk ever. This professor had irked most of the students in the department who had taken her class. Then the day comes. We all turn our papers in, and I'm visibly excited by everything. The professor comes in and goes full Dolores Umbridge. "I certainly hope everyone met the requirements and put care into their work. If not, we'll soon find out." She goes to the piano and pulls the first paper off the stack and makes some comments about it that aren't negative but are a bit goading regarding the amount of effort it seems to take to write it. She, apparently, pulls mine up about 2/3 of the way, sits down to play it, and stops at the first chord. She looks around, makes eye contact with me, and straight up glares before regaining her composure and plunking through my piece. There's several chords that make a nice crunch before she corrects herself. That darn not flat note tripped her up every time, and it sounds like whoever wrote this piece did a crap job because of how it sounded. At the end, the meek international student who has perfect pitch raises her hand and goes, "Excuse me, doctor, that piece just played. It has 6 flats in the key, yes?" "Yes, it did. I didn't quite expect that." "You didn't play all 6 flats. It didn't sound." Professor turns, glares at me and goes, No, I did not." I got a 97% because she marked a chord label incorrect. I went back in and showed her that she missed the not flat note in the chord and that it was actually labeled correctly. Got it changed to a 100%. Maybe this was the teacher's evil plan all along. To play a Dolores Umbridge type evil character, bitter at her job, bitter at the class, bitter at life. And why does she play this character? To inspire her best student, who doesn't participate in class. How does she motivate him? By becoming the enemy. I'd like to imagine that that was the scenario, at least anyway, but it's much more satisfying that he was actually forced to put in a lot of effort just to get revenge at a terrible teacher. This incident happened about 8 years ago. It was my sister's birthday and a lot of my family members from my dad's side were invited. My dad's sister, who will be called EM henceforth, and her daughter, EC henceforth, were visiting us after a lot of years because they shifted to California. So EM wanted her daughter to be the center of attention since the moment they came in. EC was about 7 years old and everyone was quite taken with her because she spoke in an adorable accent. When it was the time for cutting the cake, EM wanted EC to cut it, even though it was my sister's birthday. The reason being, she is a kid. She deserves to cut the cake. She is the youngest of them all. My sister is way too old to be cutting cakes anyway. It was my sister's 11th birthday. EM's request, or order, was declined by my mum, which made EM quite angry. When dinner was served, EM was very hungry and sat down to eat. As soon as she started, EC started crying and demanded to be fed. And EM expected my mum to stop eating and feed her kid, and my mother agreed. The worst was the time of gift unwrapping. My sister loves Barbies, so she received a doll and a dollhouse from my mum and dad, and I gave her a bunch of homemade chocolate that I made myself. What does S need chocolate for? Come on, give them to EC. You are way too old for them. My sister gave EC some of them, which EC proceeded to start eating right away. Sister went on to unwrap other presents, and was made to share a bunch of other stuff like sparkle pens and a set of crayons, etc. too with EC. EC, after some time, started wailing that she wanted more chocolate. EM literally shouting, "Why have you not given her chocolates? Didn't I ask you to? Why are you being so mean? She's your cousin. She deserves them." My sister was almost at tears and gave her 3 more. Now only 5 chocolates remained, which she gave 1 to each of us, Mum, Dad, EM and me. I saved mine to give it to her later. EM noticed it and asked me to give it to EC. Since I obviously was not going to eat it, I didn't. When sister got to unwrapping the dollhouse and the Barbie, EM actually pounced on the doll and started pulling it away from S. Now S started to cry, which made EM angry, and she screamed at S to shut up and stop being so mean and stingy. EC was from the US and did not have any Indian toys, and she needed the doll. My father flat out refused, which resulted in more screaming and crying. Then she left in a huff and kicked at the dollhouse, denting it. My sister was very sad, and needless to say, her birthday was ruined. But that was not the end. About an hour or so later, EM was back kicking and screaming at our door, saying we had poisoned her kid and that she would be suing us. EC's stomach was aching, but instead of calling a doctor, she had drove her to our house. We seated them and called the doctor, during which EM was screaming about how we were jealous of her and we would suffer terrible fates. The doctor said the pain was because of overeating. Guess she shouldn't have had 6 of those chocolates. EM then proceeded to blame me and my sis for everything, and saying how both of us were spoiled and mean kids. Entitled parents and kids can't even share the spotlight for one day. A birthday to a little kid is like a really important thing, and kids remember that stuff. The fact that this story happened 8 years ago, and it's still obviously significant enough to write a story about it on the internet. Like, if someone ruined your birthday as an adult, 1, birthdays aren't as significant, and 2, you kind of just forget that stuff and you brush it off more. You kind of realize that's just kind of what life is like. But when you're a kid and it's supposed to be special and then it's taken away from you, that kind of sticks with you. That's when you first realize there are people like this in the world. It's not the kind of lasting impression that you really want to make. Submit your story to be read on the channel at voiceyherestories@gmail.com and join our Voicey veteran community at r/VoiceyHere. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss an episode. Alright, Voicey veterans, I'll see you in the next one.